The steady beep of the cardiac monitor was the first sound Alma Drayton heard when she surfaced from the anesthesia. Then the coldness of the room. Then the weight of her own chest, stitched and wrapped and throbbing in a slow, deep rhythm that told her she was still here, still breathing, still alive. She had made it through. She reached for the call button and her fingers found something else instead. Paper. Stiff paper, folded against the bedrail beside her hand. She blinked the room into focus. The ICU of Meridian Medical Center in Richmond, Virginia. Private room, low lights, the kind of quiet that hospitals engineer to feel like calm even when it isn't. Monitors blinked above her. An IV line ran into the back of her left hand. And then she saw Colt. Colt Rutherford stood at the foot of the bed in his charcoal suit, the one he wore to board meetings. Not a hospital waiting room wrinkle on him. Not the faint red of a man who'd spent 12 hours terrified in a surgical waiting room. He looked exactly the way he always looked. Composed, expensive, impatient. He wasn't holding flowers. "Good," he said when her eyes found his. "You're awake." Alma's throat was dry from the breathing tube. She swallowed with difficulty. How long? Surgery ran 9 hours. He moved to the side of the bed, not to hold her hand, but to retrieve the folded papers he'd left against the railing. The surgeon said it went well. "You'll be here a few more days." Something about the way he said it, practical, clipped, as though recapping a conference call she'd missed, made the hair on her arms rise. "Colt." Her voice came out hoarser than she intended. "Why are you in your work suit?" He set the papers on her meal tray. "I came from a meeting. Listen, Alma, while we have a moment alone." "While we have a moment alone," she repeated the words slowly as though tasting them. "I just had open-heart surgery." "I know that." A flicker of something, not quite guilt, not quite conscience, crossed his face and disappeared. "And I'm glad it went well. But there are things we need to address. I've spoken with my attorney, and there's a document here I need you to sign. A power of attorney, temporary, just until you're fully recovered, so I can manage the Drayton assets while you're unable to." Alma stared at the papers. Through the haze of morphine and shock, one phrase snagged in her mind like a splinter. The Drayton assets. Not our assets, not the family finances, not even my accounts, the Drayton assets. "You came here," she said quietly, "with paperwork. It's practical. You came here with paperwork instead of flowers." The words cost her something. Each one scraped against the rawness in her chest. "I woke up from 9 hours of surgery, and the first thing you did was put documents on my meal tray." Colt exhaled the way he always did when he thought she was being emotional about something rational. "I'm trying to protect our interests while you can't." "No." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have the strength to. But she turned her face away from him and pressed the call button on the bed rail. "No, you're not." He reached for the papers before a nurse could arrive. "Alma, just read them. Get out of this room." The door opened before he could respond. A night shift nurse stepped in, clocking the tension the way medical professionals learn to. Fast, quiet, certain. She looked at Alma's vitals on the monitor, then at Colt, then back at Alma. "Everything all right, Mrs. Rutherford?" Alma shook her head once. The nurse didn't hesitate. "Sir, I'll need to ask you to step into the hall while I check on my patient." Colt picked up the papers from the tray with deliberate slowness, folded them back into his breast pocket, and walked out without another word. His shoes made the same sound on hard floors they always made, decisive, important, in a hurry. The nurse closed the door behind him and moved to Alma's side. Her name tag read Diane Chu, RN. She was somewhere in her 50s with calm eyes and the particular steadiness that comes from years of sitting beside people at their worst. "Is there someone I can call for you?" she asked. Alma closed her eyes. There was one name, one person who had always known where the real documents were. "Nell," she said. "Nell Harwick. She's in my phone under N. I'll have someone get it from your belongings right now." Nell Harwick arrived at Meridian Medical Center at 11:20 that night in a camel coat and low heels, carrying the leather satchel she'd had since law school. She was 41, 3 years older than Alma, and she had known Alma's family since before Alma was born. Her mother and Alma's mother had been law school roommates. The friendship passed down like property. She found Alma conscious, pale, and more collected than Nell had expected given the circumstances. "He brought documents," Alma said before Nell even sat down. Nell set her satchel on the visitor chair. "I know. The nurse called the social worker on duty after you asked for me. The social worker called me directly." She paused. "I've been expecting something like this." Alma looked at her sharply. "You knew he would." "I didn't know when. But your mother asked me to watch for signs." Nell opened her satchel and withdrew a folder. Older than everything else she carried, its edges worn soft with time. "Your parents put this together a long time ago, Alma. When you were still in college. Before you met Colt. Before any of this." Alma reached for the folder with a hand not connected to the IV. Inside were documents she had seen fragments of over the years but never fully sat with. The Drayton Family Trust, established 2 decades ago by her parents, Warren and June Drayton, both now gone, her father to a stroke 6 years ago, her mother in a car accident 3 years later. The trust held everything: the family property in the Shenandoah Valley, a historic colonial home her grandfather had built with his own hands. 12 acres of surrounding land her parents had refused to sell despite every pressure to do so, and controlling interest in Drayton Land Partners, a private company managing additional acreage across 3 counties in Virginia. Sole beneficiary, Alma Renee Drayton. Not Alma Rutherford. Not the marital estate of Colt and Alma Rutherford. Alma Drayton. "He can't touch any of this," Nell said quietly. "Not a single acre. Not the house. Your prenuptial agreement explicitly excludes all Drayton family assets, and the trust itself has a clause your mother insisted on, that no beneficiary's spouse may exert legal or financial control over trust assets without a court order. It can't be signed away with a power of attorney." She paused. "Whatever document he brought you tonight would have been meaningless. Even if you'd signed it." Alma sat with that for a moment. Her chest ached. Not the surgical wound, something deeper, older. "He doesn't know," she said. Nell shook her head. "He married you thinking the Drayton name opened doors to Drayton money. He was never told the details, and he never asked the right questions. Why would he?" But even as she started the sentence, she already knew the answer. Because Colt Rutherford had always measured people by their immediate usefulness. He had never asked what her parents owned, because he'd assumed he already understood what he was marrying into. She turned toward the window. Richmond at night, the lights amber and blue through the glass. 12 acres in the valley. A house her grandfather built. A company she had never run but legally owned. "His company," she said slowly. "Something's been wrong with it." Nell's expression didn't change. "The board filed an internal audit request 2 weeks ago. There are unauthorized transfers, investor reports that don't match the actual numbers." She hesitated. "He needed liquidity, fast, and he looked at what he thought you had." Alma exhaled slowly through her nose. The cardiac monitor kept its rhythm beside her, indifferent, steady, proof that her heart was still working, even when everything else felt like it was coming apart. "There's something else," Nell said. Alma looked at her. "A woman has been calling his office for 3 days. His assistant flagged it to the audit team because the calls were coming to his direct line after hours. Her name is Becca Thorne. She's 26. She's been staying at the Fairmont." Nell's voice remained level. "The charges are on a card connected to an account under your name." Alma closed her eyes. She had known. Not with proof, not with certainty, but in the way that knowledge lives with a person quietly for months before it's ever spoken aloud. Small things. Late returns. Business trips without itineraries. The way he'd stopped looking at her the same way. Not cruelly, just differently. Like she had become infrastructure rather than a person. She had told herself it was the stress of her diagnosis, of the surgery planning, of being afraid. "How long?" she asked. "At least 8 months, from what his assistant could piece together." 8 months. While Alma had been learning what a cardiac surgeon's schedule looked like. While she had been revising her will, in case the surgery didn't go the way everyone hoped. While she had been very quietly, very privately, learning what it felt like to be afraid of her own heart. She pressed her palm flat against the blanket covering her sternum. "Okay," she said, "just the one word." Nell watched her carefully. "Alma." "I'm all right." And she was, in a way that surprised her. The hurt was real. It ran deep and cold. But there was something underneath it the pain hadn't reached. Something that had been waiting for her to stop pretending it wasn't there. Colt came back at 7 the next morning. Alma's surgeon had already done rounds. Her vitals were stable. She had slept 4 hours and was propped up slightly in the bed, her dark hair loose, an untouched cup of hospital tea on the tray beside her. He didn't knock. He never knocked. Nell was sitting in the corner with her satchel on her lap. She looked up when he entered and said nothing. Colt stopped when he saw her. Something passed across his face. Recognition, calculation, the rapid reset that happened when a man understood a room was no longer configured the way he'd prepared for. Mrs. Harwick. He made the name sound like an interruption. Mr. Rutherford. Nell crossed one leg over the other and folded her hands in her lap. Please sit. He didn't sit. He looked at Alma. I'd like to speak with my wife privately. That's not going to happen, Alma said. Her voice was steadier than it had been the night before. Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of Nell. A muscle in his jaw moved. He reached into his jacket for the folded papers. I need you to sign these today. My attorney has advised. Your attorney? Nell said pleasantly. Hasn't read the Drayton Family Trust. I have. She opened her satchel and set the folder on the visitor table with the quiet precision that Alma had always associated with her, the kind of movement that communicated authority without requiring volume. Every asset your wife's family has ever held is structured in a way that makes this document. She glanced at the papers in his hand, completely unenforceable. You would know this if you had ever asked to see the trust documents in 11 years of marriage. Colt's expression shifted. The composed certainty he'd walked in with began to loosen at the edges. That's not possible. The house is not marital property. The land is not marital property. The company holding the secondary parcels in Augusta and Rockbridge counties is not marital property. Nell's voice didn't rise. The prenuptial agreement your own attorney drafted in 2015 explicitly excluded all Drayton family assets. You signed it, Colt. He stared at the folder as though the ground under him had moved. The prenup, that was for the primary residence. For all Drayton assets, current and future. Your attorney's language, not mine. Nell's expression was almost sympathetic. I think you may want to read it more carefully. Alma watched her husband's face. She had known this man for 13 years. She had watched him in boardrooms when deals moved against him. That particular stillness, the way he went quiet before going aggressive. She recognized it now. This is your doing, he said, turning to her. You're doing this deliberately. You're trying to. Colt. Her voice was calm and final. I had open-heart surgery yesterday. I'm doing nothing deliberately. I'm lying in a hospital bed. You're the one who came here with paperwork. He set the papers on the tray. Sign them. The company is under pressure, and I need access to capital. The company, Nell said, is under federal audit. The silence that followed was different from other silences. Heavier. The kind that tells everyone in a room that something has just changed permanently. Colt's voice dropped. How do you know about the audit? The audit team contacted Alma's financial advisor 3 days ago. They found transfers from an account connected to her name. They needed to establish whether she had any knowledge or involvement. Nell let that sit for a moment. She didn't. Colt's composure fractured in a way Alma had never seen. He was a man who had always been able to reassemble himself in the middle of any conversation. Find the angle, pivot, close the gap. But there was no angle here. He could see it now, and the knowledge of it moved through his face like weather passing. I can explain the transfers. You'll have the opportunity, Nell said. I expect the investigators will want to hear it. He looked at Alma one more time. Something that might have been shame crossed his face, or might only have been the look of a man realizing a plan has failed at every single point of execution. Then the door opened. A woman in her mid-20s stood in the doorway. Red blonde hair pulled back sharply, expensive clothes that didn't quite fit the hour, eyes that were swollen from crying in a hotel bathroom before she'd decided to stop. She clutched her phone with both hands, like it was the last solid thing available to her. She looked at Colt. You weren't answering, she said. I've been calling since last night. Colt's expression closed like a door. Nell rose from her chair. Alma looked at the woman in the doorway and understood, without being told, exactly who she was. "You're Becca," Alma said quietly. Becca Thorne's eyes moved to her, to the hospital bed, the monitors, the bandaging visible at the collar of the hospital gown. Something complicated moved through Becca's face. Whatever she had expected to find here, it wasn't this. She had the look of someone who had walked toward a door they'd been promised led somewhere, and discovered it opened onto nothing at all. "He said you were?" She stopped. "He said you were basically separated." "We are not separated," Alma said. "We were not separated 8 months ago. We were married. We had a home." She paused. "I was planning surgery." Becca looked at Colt. He said nothing. That silence was its own answer, and Becca Thorne was sharp enough to read it. "He told me," she said slowly, "that you had a trust fund, that you were wealthy, that once the divorce was final he'd have access to your family's assets, and we could." She stopped again. Her jaw tightened. "He told me about the house in the valley, what it was worth. He described it like it was already his." "That house," Nell said, "has been in Alma's family for 3 generations. It is protected by a trust that predates this marriage by 15 years. Mr. Rutherford has no claim to it, and he would have known that had he ever read the legal documents he signed." Becca sat down in the second visitor chair without being invited. She sat the way someone sits when their legs have decided before their mind has. She set her phone on her knee. After a moment she looked at Alma directly, and this time she didn't look away. "He moved money into an account under my name 6 months ago," she said. "He said it was a gift. But last week he told me I needed to give it back. He needed it for something else." She unlocked her phone and held it out toward Nell. "I think he was using me to hide it. Move it somewhere the auditors couldn't find it." Nell took the phone. She looked at the screen for a long moment. Colt stepped forward. "Becca, don't." "Don't what?" Becca's voice was very quiet. "You told me she had everything. You told me you were leaving her. You said after the divorce came through, you'd take care of us." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh, except it wasn't. "You were in my hotel room the night before her surgery, Colt. And then you came here and put papers on her hospital tray." The room was very still. Alma looked at her husband. She had loved him once. Had loved him genuinely. Had believed in the version of him he'd shown her in the beginning. The version that had slowly been replaced over years by someone she recognized less and less. Grief moved through her now, not for what she was losing, but for how long she had been losing it without admitting it. "I need you to leave this room," she said. "Both of you should leave." Colt moved toward her. "Alma." "Security can help you find the exit," Nell said. She had already pressed the call button on the wall. By 10 that morning, 2 things had happened. The first, Colt Rutherford left Meridian Medical Center accompanied by a federal investigator who arrived with documentation of 9 separate unauthorized transfers between accounts connected to Drayton Land Partners and a shell company Colt had opened 18 months earlier. He left without his briefcase. He left without the papers he'd brought for Alma to sign. He left looking like a man who had been walking very fast toward a door and discovered at the last moment that the door was a wall. The second, Becca Thorne sat in the hospital social worker's office for 2 hours giving a recorded statement. She gave it voluntarily. She gave it completely. Whatever she had hoped for when she'd walked into this hospital, it had not been this. But she was practical enough to understand that the only direction now was forward, and the only person she could protect at this point was herself. She handed over the bank records, the text messages, the transfer documentation, and a confidentiality agreement Colt had drafted himself and asked her to sign 9 months ago. She had never understood what she was signing. She understood now. Nell came back to Alma's room at 10:30 with coffee she'd found somewhere, and the quiet, settled expression of someone who has just finished a long piece of work. "Is she going to be all right?" Alma asked. She meant Becca. Nell considered it honestly. She made her own choices along the way, but she understood the situation quickly, and she cooperated fully. That matters. Alma looked at the ceiling for a moment. The cardiac monitor beeped its steady count. Outside the window, Richmond had gone a bright November blue, the kind of cold, clear day that seems to have no memory of the night before. My mother always said the people who hurt you most are the ones who never bothered to find out who you actually were, she said. She used to say it about my father's business partners. I think she was also saying it about Colt, years before I understood. She was saying it about a type, Nell said. She was. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. A man in a navy jacket stepped in, carrying a slim leather case. He was older, somewhere in his 60s, with the careful bearing of someone accustomed to delivering important things to people at important moments. Mrs. Drayton, he said. He'd been told she preferred her given name. Yes. My name is Charles Osmond. I'm with Osmond & Vale, the firm that administered your parents' estate. He approached slowly, setting the leather case on the visitor table. I was asked to deliver something to you when two conditions were met. The trust had been reviewed by your designated attorney, and you were in a position to receive it safely. He glanced at Nell. Mrs. Harwick notified us last night. He opened the case. Inside was an envelope, cream-colored, sealed with the small oak tree stamp Alma recognized from childhood, the mark her mother had used on all formal correspondence. Her hands were steadier than she expected when she reached for it. Inside was a single folded page, covered in her mother's handwriting. June Drayton had written in a wide, even cursive that had always looked like calm made visible. Alma, if you're reading this, then the things I worried about came to pass, and you are stronger than the worrying. I always knew you would be, even when you weren't sure. That's what mothers carry, the certainty about their children that the children can't yet hold for themselves. Your father and I built what we built because we knew the world tests women in particular ways. It tests them at their most open, when they trust, when they love, when they believe someone is who they've presented themselves to be. We could not protect you from that, but we could make sure that when the test came, you had something underneath you that no one could take away. The land is yours. The house is yours. Everything we made belongs to you and to your children if you have them, and to no one who is not born or chosen into this family. You are a Drayton. That is not a name that disappears when someone tries to erase it. Come home when you're ready. It will be waiting. With all my love, Mom. Alma folded the letter against her chest, over the place where her heart had been repaired, and held it there. She did not try to stop the tears. There was no reason to. Nell stood quietly by the window. Charles Osmond stepped back toward the door to give her privacy. The November light fell across the bed in long, clean angles, and the monitor kept its soft, faithful rhythm, steady proof that the most important repair had already held. After a while, Alma looked up. Tell me about the company, she said to Nell. Drayton Land Partners. Tell me everything it is and everything it owns. Nell pulled out her folder and sat back down. There was something in her expression that was not quite a smile, but was close enough to recognize. The look of someone watching the right thing happen at exactly the right time. It's substantial, she said. Your parents were careful people. They were. Alma set the letter on the tray beside her untouched coffee. Outside, the city moved through its morning the way cities always do, indifferent to any single life's turning point, unaware that something had shifted here, in this room, in a woman who had come in frightened and was going to leave as someone else entirely. Tell me everything, from the beginning. She was 38 years old. She had a repaired heart and a name that had meant something long before she understood what that meant. And she was done, completely, finally, irreversibly done, being a woman someone else thought they had figured out. The beginning, it turned out, was exactly where she needed to start.